what do you say, Jewish as their religion. Okay, so the first exile was Assyria and Babylon in 722 BC. In 722 BC, the first exile happened. That is, the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom and sent away all the Israelites into across other nations or countries, we can say. They deported so many Israelites. Then Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, burned Jerusalem, and destroyed the temple that Solomon built. He then exiled the Israelites to Babylon. Now we'll see the return of this Israelites, how it happened. Return from exile under the Persians. The Persians again in 539 BC. Emperor name called Cyrus of Babylon became the most powerful person in the world. Cyrus permitted the Jews to return to their land. This continued for 200 years. During this time, Jerusalem was rebuilt. Jews were allowed to return, but many remained abroad in exile. So that's the return of Jewish people. And then the period of Greeks. We'll see the period of Greeks. After this, after the Persians, Greeks came and conquered Persian Empire and then made Israelites, made Israelites their slaves, and then for another 200 years. And then after Greeks, Romans period came in. Then the Romans defeated the Greek empires, and then they became the dominant world power. The Jews again became a province in this empire. This was the time when Jesus lived. Jesus is a Jew. Okay, the second Jewish exile under the Romans, from the Roman time of the Babylonian, this happened in 586 BC. The Jews had been independent under King David. So when Romans, started ruling, Jews resented this, and then they revolted against Roman rule. The Romans destroyed the entire Jerusalem in 70 AD. They burned the temple and deported the Jews as slaves across the Roman Empire. Eventually, Jews got scattered around the world. So that's how they got scattered in different parts of the world, we can see. So coming back to 20th century, this is the very horrific period, I can say, for Jewish people. Destruction, Holocaust, we can say Holocaust, that is destruction or slaughter on a mass scale. The persecution against Jews reached their peak. This happened between 1941 to 1945, that was the World War II. So Nazis murdered nearly 600 million Jewish Europeans. They were into different European countries, so they were murdered. So when Hitler, through Nazi Germany, tried to exterminate Jewish living in Europe, he almost succeeded, but he was defeated, and a remnant of Jews survived. Somehow, some people, could escape and again, move to countries like Canada, US, or some parts of Africa. So that's how the Jewish people got scattered, and this is the history of Jewish people. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a very good summary of the history of Jews.
Thank you.
Again, I mean, it's impossible to confine or kind of scrunch it into 5 or 10 minute summary, but that's very good. Thank you for that wonderful job. So does anybody have any questions for Lily? If not, we will move on and then talk about our Jewish writing topic. Does anybody have any questions, or can we move on? Okay.
We will move on, sir.
Sorry, say that again.
We will move on, sir.
Okay, ठीक है. All right, ठीक है. Okay, is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So one thing you'll have to remember, right? While Lily was talking, she did mention these, but then in the passing, right? But one thing you'll have to remember is Jewish history is filled with, while it is vast and then, it is exhaustive, it is filled with atrocities. It is filled with homelessness. It is filled with, picking them up and then throwing them somewhere else, right? So these are the things that you'll have to remember. Why? Because even though, the history goes back to before Christ, the history was kind of sort of pretty much the same in the 20th century also, like Lily mentioned, like the Holocaust. We'll talk about it in a bit, but then, these atrocities against Jews still continued in the 20th century. So now, like I always say, history cannot be taken away from literature, right? So, so what happens is with this history and atrocities and everything happening against Jews, that is totally reflected in their writings also. Okay, but we will see what those are. Okay, I'm sorry, one sec. How do I minimize this thing? Okay, yeah. So as we have just heard, Jewish history is filled with brutality, not once, but then multiple times, right? From the destruction of the temple at the time of Solomon, and then the second time, and then the Holocaust, everything, right? But the latest one is the Holocaust from the Second World War, where, over 6 million Jews were ruthlessly murdered. Okay, but let's go a little back in the history, not too far, but then a little back. Now, Jewish immigrants started coming into America because we're talking about American history. We will confine ourselves to America. Okay, so they started coming into America in the mid 17th century. Now, what did these people write at that time? Like any other, like our Native Americans wrote, like our other authors wrote, they initially wrote memoirs. Okay, does everybody know what memoirs are? MEMOIRS. I can type it in the chat box actually. MEMOIRS. Okay, that. Does anybody know what memoir is? Okay, that's okay. So what a memoir is it's a narrative written by an author about a significant event or important part of their life. Okay, about their own life. They go in detail about certain time period of their life and then talk about it. So because this is about the author's life, memoirs are kind of filled with facts. Okay, they're not fiction. They don't make up stuff, but then they report facts. Okay, but then immediately we'll have one question. Okay, hold on. What's the chat saying? Short biography kind of. Yes, Nagalakshmi has said short biography kind of, but that's good. But it's you mean autobiography, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. Now my next question will be, Nagalakshmi, if you're saying it's a short autobiography, then why do we have two terms, right? One memoir and then one autobiography. What's the difference between these two? Do you know what the difference between these two is? Yeah, Nagalakshmi,
Sir,
you can unmute yourself and then.
Yes, sir. I think memoirs are like very short descriptions of their life,
Okay.
and autobiographies are like very huge and they give a lot of information about a person. And memoirs are like very short descriptions of their life, or we can say like anecdotes of a few things of their life. Is it right?
Okay, yeah. Yes, you're right. Most part of your sentence is right. But the key point in memoir is anecdote that you said, right? So it talks about a certain time period. It doesn't talk about this guy or girl's whole life, right? An autobiography usually covers a lot more time period than a memoir. Okay, so the basic difference between these two is that an autobiography, it spans an author's complete life until a certain point, until that person is writing that book. Okay. Now, on the other hand, memoirs are more focused about a certain event or a time period, and then the author gives like detailed description about that particular event or time period, not their whole life. Okay, that's the basic difference. Okay, so anyway, the early writings were memoirs in the mid 17th century. While this happened well before the 20th century, now 20th century is where we have Jewish writing that we can call, quote unquote, Jewish American novels. Okay, before that time, they were off and on novels written and then works written and then autobiographies and memoirs written. But then, 20th century is when the Jewish American novels flourished. Now, 3 names or 4 names actually automatically come into everybody's head when we say Jewish American authors. Okay, one is, of course, the great Bernard Malamud, and then there is Saul Bellow. People talk about Norma Mailer and then Philip Roth. The last name on your screen, Adrienne Rich, she was a poet, and if we have time, we'll go over her poetry. But the other two, the top 3 immediately come into anybody's head when you say Jewish American writing. So if there is a question in the exam, and then no matter what it's asking you, if it's asking you, or let me put it this way, if it's asking you for an overview of Jewish American writing, your answer should have these names. Okay, without these names, there's nothing in, not nothing, but then the majority of 20th century is gone. Okay, these names have to figure out in your answer somehow. All right, so just remember that. Now, what we will do is very quickly, we will talk about 2 writers, Malamud and Bellow. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm having to move this thing. Okay. All right, that's Malamud. His pictures. Oh, before we go there, right? The script on your screen, right? That's Yiddish. Now, why am I putting a Yiddish thing on your screen? That's because I wanted to make a point and then I totally forgot about it. Even though we talk about Jewish writing and then we say Jewish American writing, it is primarily in English. But that doesn't mean it's only written in English. Okay, there are also other writings in other languages, especially Yiddish. Okay, now Yiddish is the language that is, like I said, it's on the image on your screen. Having said that, we will confine ourselves today to English writings. Okay, but just remember that Jewish American writing doesn't mean just English writing. It is also writings in other languages. Okay, we'll go back to Malamud now. Now that the guy on your screen, that's Bernard Malamud. He was born in 1914. If you remember our discussion from previous classes, this is the same year when World War I started, right? So again, you cannot take history away from a person's life or even literature. So when Malamud was in his teens, so he was born when World War I started. And then when this guy was in his teens, the world experienced this thing called Great Depression. We talked about that also, this great economic depression where people were thrown into poverty and everything. Then of course we know that the World War II happened. So you can see his experiences life is filled with horrific events. It's not like happy go kind of events, but it's more terrible events that he has gone through. Now if you really look at this guy's writing, he did not write much especially when compared to other writers we have seen in earlier units, but he wrote about very pertinent themes of his time. Now, what does that mean? Like I mentioned earlier, rootlessness, homelessness. Homelessness, I don't mean, you're poor and then you're living on the road. That's not the homelessness I'm talking about, but more of, a place or a country or a specific place to call it your home. That is something that is a very big thing in Jewish history. So rootlessness or homelessness, abuse, suffering, these are all very common in his writings. Now, this suffering doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Okay, it's not like somebody going and slapping somebody and then they're crying. It's not just that suffering. It can also be mental suffering, because if you see, like we have discussed in various times in the previous units, World War I, World War II, Great Depression, all these things happened in a matter of 50 years, right? The first half of the 20th century. It can cause great mental suffering. It's not just physical suffering that somebody, a close friend or family or somebody has died, but then it has a tremendous impact on the head and the brain, right? Now, that shows in most of the Jewish American writings. And another thing that Malamud is famous for is his famous quote is, he said, all men are Jews. Okay, that's what he said. I'm quoting Malamud here. He says all men are Jews. Now what does that mean? He doesn't mean that all men practice Judaism or all men practice this specific religion or anything of that sort. This is more of a metaphor. Okay, this is a metaphor for the how do I put it? This is a metaphor for the universality of alienation and suffering. Let me put it that way. So basically what Malamud means is, just like Jews have gone through alienation and suffered in their history, all men kind of go through the same phases of alienation and suffering sometime or the other in their life. Okay, that's why he's saying all men are Jews. Okay, so he's basically comparing the history of Jewish people with all men, basically, and that's why he says all men are Jews. Okay, anyway, now he doesn't just say this and leave. Okay, his works, while he's talking about alienation and suffering, his works also give a hope for his characters. Okay, it's not like his characters are completely wallowing in pain and then they in the end they suffer and then that's it. That's not how he writes his works. He gives hope in the end, right? Now his characters have a moral compulsion to make the very best of their lives. Okay, even though they know that their lives have constraints, even though they know that life throws a lot of troubles at them, they still try to excuse me, make very best of their lives. Most of his characters. Now we'll take probably an example from what Malamud wrote, and then we will see one of his themes coming across. Okay, he wrote this novel called The Assistant. I think it was his second novel, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, he wrote this novel, The Assistant, which is a story about this old guy. His name is Morris Bobber. It is a story about this old guy, a young guy called Frank Alpine, and some other characters. We'll not get into the other characters. Okay, these are the two main characters. So this Morris guy is the old guy, Frank guy is the young guy. Remember that. And then Morris runs a grocery store, okay, somewhere in New York or somewhere. And then one night he's robbed and then he's beaten completely. Okay. Now Frank Alpine, the new guy, after some time he joins this old guy Morris's store as an assistant, which is why that's the title of the story, The Assistant. Now we find out later that this young guy Frank was part of the gang of, okay, hold on, somebody's video is on. Is that Lily? Lily, is your video on?
So sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. Okay. So this Morris guy is an old guy. Frank is the young guy. Frank comes and joins this guy's grocery store. And then later we find out that Frank was part of that gang of robbers that, beats Morris and then throws him away. Okay, Frank now joins Morris. Why does he join? With the intention to pay Morris back his money. Okay, Frank basically repents for what he has done. He thinks, why did I hit this old guy? And then, out of that repentance, he comes and then joins this old guy's grocery store. But there's a twist here, okay? But while he pays Morris back, he also steals from him. Why does he do that? The excuse that this guy gives himself is, this old guy's shop is running very well because of Frank, who is the young guy. Okay, so he says, this guy's shop is running really well because of me. So there's no problem in, stealing from him. Just take some money and then I will return him someday. Okay, so that's the excuse that he gives himself. So anyway, a lot of stuff happens in between. Frank gets caught by Morris while stealing money. Morris throws him out, and then Morris dies with something. Frank returns to the shop and everything. The way the novel ends with Frank working in the store. Okay, he studies Judaism and then he becomes a Jew in the end. Okay, that's how the novel ends. Okay, immediately we will see guilt as one of the themes, right? Why? Because Frank has joined this old guy Morris, and out of guilt, because he repents and then he joins. Now guilt comes into picture, deception comes into picture, suffering comes into picture. All of these come out as the themes of this novel. Now Malamud's other works also touch upon these themes. Okay. The reason why I'm mentioning only one work of Malamud is because when you're asked in the exam about, even if they ask specifically about Malamud, then of course you don't have any other choice except for writing about him. But if they say, write about any Jewish author and their works, then my preference, quote unquote, is that you start with, Jewish themes. They're listed on your screen: rootlessness, infidelity, abuse, journey, and then suffering. Start with them and then talk about Malamud, if you can remember him, or Bellow, who we will talk about later. And then you talk about one of Malamud's stories, the assistant or whatever, then related to the themes. Okay. Now, why I'm mentioning this is not specific to this particular person or this particular, quote unquote bucket of writing, Jewish writing. Any question that is generic enough to basically say, explain about 20th century American fiction, or explain about one of your favorite American poets of 20th century, whatever, right? The question is, don't directly jump into, your subjectivity and then start talking about what you think about it, but start with a little bit of history. I mean, don't write the complete history, but then, start a little bit of history, talk about the general stuff, and then go into the specific stuff. Okay. Always go from the general to the specific. Okay. Don't start with the specific, because then your answer will be too short and then you'll be talking about very little stuff. Instead of that, you start with the general and then go into the specific. Okay. Now, one of the things that is very, very interesting in Jewish American writing is this character type. Okay. This is not a character. This is a character type. It is called Shlemil. Okay, it's pronounced Shlemil, and then the word is written on your screen. I think it's the last bullet point. Yeah. What or who is a Shlemil? Okay, this character type is not, again, specific to Malamud, but most Jewish American writers have this character. Somewhere in their work, they will have this character. Now, Shlemil is a Yiddish term that means stupid or incompetent, awkward person. Okay, I think we have some of this character type comes in across in the Bollywood movies also. Sometimes you have these like a side character, stupid, awkward, incompetent person, right? Now, usually authors put this character type in to bring in humor in most works. Okay, like, I mean, stupid person, incompetent person. So he'll do something stupid. That is kind of sort of, a segue into bringing humor. So usually people use this, or writers use this character type to bring humor. Anyway, remember that this character type is used by other Jewish authors also, not just Malamud. Okay, that's the important point. Okay, the next guy we are talking about is Saul Bellow. He's a Nobel laureate. He was born in 1915, so just 1 year after Malamud was born. Bellow won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1976. Now, his works were surrounded by Jewish life, Jewish identity, and kind of sort of everything related to Jewish. Okay, not Judaism. Judaism is a religion. Jewish is the identity. Okay, so it has everything to do with Jewish life, and then how the immigrant experience is, and then everything. Now, Bellow is the kind of person who saw a lot of issues with modern civilization. And then that he didn't hide it. Okay, so that particular theme came across in his works. He was also fascinated by America. He was not against America. He was fascinated by America, and then the experience he had in America growing up, and that also came across as a theme. Okay, now his most famous works are listed on your screen. You can take a look at that. These are all novels, but he has also written short stories. He's written one play. He's written non-fiction work. Like pretty much every author that we have seen, right, except for the poets. Majority of the people that we have seen